Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is a first of what I hope will be many more opportunities for us to talk about Israel, both or all past, present, and future. The war in Israel, the abduction, torture, death of our Israeli family is very personal for many of us. And I think I can say for all of us, because we are all here, that what is happening is at least of great concern and incredible importance. Before I introduce our guest speaker, Sam, tonight, Sam Sokol, I'd like for Shelley, our chief tech guru, to explain how the webinar is going to work tonight. Shelley?
Thanks, Beth. So this is a different sort of format. It's one that is a little bit less interactive than our normal Zoom meeting, but it does allow for a good presentation to a number of folks. What those that are watching will note is that it is the presenters being able to show their camera. You don't have the ability to turn on camera or speak. It helps kind of streamline the information. However, we do want this to be interactive. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, whether you're on a computer or on a phone, you will see a Q&A button. And if you click on that, you will see Ask Question there, and you can type in a question and we'll see that. And it will help us know what people are thinking. We might see several questions that are similar, which might prioritize it. So if you have any questions whatsoever, just go to the bottom of your screen, click on Q&A, and type Ask Question, and we will get it there. I think that's the key difference here. Please feel free to ask anything that comes up. And I will remind you of this when Sam is done for people who have come in maybe a little bit late where the Q&A function is. Thank you, Beth, and I think we're ready to go.
Great. So everybody, you should know that Rabbi Dan is here. I think you can see his name on the screen, and Rabbi will have some of his own questions, help facilitate questions as they come up in the chat after Sam gives his presentation to us. So let me introduce Sam Sokol. As many of you have read in my email announcements, Sam is an Israeli-American journalist, originally from New York. Upper West Side is where his mom lives. I hope that's not too personal, but that's old home for me. Sam currently works for the Times of Israel and has been a reporter for Haaretz and the Jerusalem Post, both very popular daily Israeli journals, newspapers in Israel. So Sam, if you're ready, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So it is 4 a.m. here in Israel. So anything uninformed or stupid that I say, we can chalk that up to the hour rather than to me being wrong. But seriously speaking, it's been a very enervating couple of months in Israel. I think that a lot of our strategic and political conceptions have been overwhelmed by the reality of events in a way that we couldn't have seen just a short while ago. This summer, when we were in the throes of the political crisis in Israel over the government's proposed judicial overhaul, I don't think that anyone could have foreseen how much of a turn events would have taken. When Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu came back into power 1 year ago, one of the first things that his government did was announce a real wide-ranging legislative program to essentially overhaul the judiciary. And part of that, large parts of that, were perceived by many Israelis as anti-democratic. And we saw a protest movement sweep across the country that took, that dwarfed anything we had seen before. And over the course of nearly a year of protests, the main issues that consumed Israelis were not related to security or to the Gaza Strip or to, things going on in the neighborhood, but rather we were all looking inwards, thinking about what type of shape our democracy would be in. Pundits on the left and the right were warning about the dangers of civil war and internal strife. And the idea that we would suddenly find ourselves facing what essentially was a ground invasion was about the furthest thing from everyone's mind. Now, there were people in the defense establishment that were publicly warning that, both publicly and privately to the government, that our security was being undermined. And that was in large part due to the fact that many IDF reservists were in very critical roles, pilots, intelligence, were saying that they would refuse to continue to serve if the government's agenda, which they saw as undermining Israel's democratic order, would be advanced. And despite that, though, nobody really felt that there was a specific concrete threat. It all felt very very abstract to many people. And I think that was part of the problem, because across the board, our focus was elsewhere. It wasn't on Gaza. The feeling was that the cycle of events that we had been witnessing was something that would continue, which is Hamas shoots rockets, we conduct airstrikes, maybe a limited ground operation every few years, and then things quiet down. The Netanyahu government certainly believed that Hamas was not becoming more moderate, but was becoming sort of bogged down in the administration of the Strip and didn't want to jeopardize its position, its standing, its authority by engaging in escalation. And this is something that Hamas encouraged by occasionally staying on the sidelines while other groups would attack, such as Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They cultivated an image of not seeking a full-scale escalation. And in response, in exchange, Prime Minister Netanyahu followed a policy of facilitating funding for Hamas by the Qataris, turning, according to reports, turning aside when reports came through of sources of the group's funding from elsewhere through its business networks and investments. So Hamas wasn't the group we were focused on. Everyone's eyes were on the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, the occupied territories. We call it what we will, depending on our political inclinations, right or left. But whatever you want to call it, those territories were our focus. Most of our military forces had been diverted from the south to the West Bank because of the precipitous rise in both anti-Jewish terrorist activity and extremist attacks by far-right settlers. Everyone looked at it this way: Gaza is quiet, relatively, and the West Bank is a powder keg. And that's where the focus was, due to a number of factors, even the numbers of rifles for civilian readiness squads, the Kitot Konanut, on the Gaza border, the community volunteer security squads that are supposed to secure communities on the border until police and the army arrive. Even they had the number of rifles that they had reduced, and so everyone was looking the other way. Now, the heads of the intelligence and military communities have taken full responsibility. Multiple politicians have taken responsibility, saying, we didn't expect this, we were asleep at the switch. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not, and there has been a major groundswell of opposition to his continued leadership, including on the right. An absolute majority of Israelis have said, according to polls, that they do not want him to continue in office. And even the Israel Hayom daily newspaper, which was founded by Sheldon Adelson to be a pro-Netanyahu mouthpiece, ran an article saying Netanyahu win the war and leave. But, politics are never fully put in abeyance, but for most part, Israelis are trying to put politics on the side, or have been at least. But by the same token, not only did Netanyahu get it wrong, and not only did the army chiefs get it wrong, not only did everyone else get it wrong, but I'm going to say, as a reporter, I got it wrong. We all got it wrong. So I guess one thing to say is mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. We all missed this. Now, there's been some really good reporting in the Israeli press and the American press about the warning signs that were ignored. What we've seen is that the Tatzpitaniot, the female soldiers tasked with surveillance of the Gaza Strip and the Gaza border, had been warning for some time that of suspicious Hamas activity, including training for the assaults in plain view of the border. We know that Israel had a copy of Hamas's operational plans about a year ago. Israel dismissed it as aspirational and did not believe that Hamas had the capability or the will to actually carry it off. The thought was that militaries, even terrorist organizations, have contingency plans and put together different operational plans. It doesn't mean they're going to do it. Well, they did it. And what ended up happening on October 7th, to borrow the language of someone I was with in the South earlier today, was a gut punch. Essentially, what happened is we were caught flat-footed. So, I'm going to go a little personal here, but on October 7th, I was in the hospital. I'd had some respiratory issues, and I was at Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem on oxygen, having trouble breathing. And I wake up and it's Simchat Torah, and I wake up and I'm wheezing and I'm trying to breathe, and I hear from the man in the bed next to me in the hospital room. I hear from his phone. He's watching the news, and there's something about gunmen in Sderot, down south. And my first thought is, well, that can't be right. I'm groggy, I'm tired, and I'm having trouble breathing. I'm sure I just didn't understand it right. And over the next minute or so, as I started to be less groggy and figure out what was going on, I understood that, no, this is really happening. And I hobble over to his bed and I look over his shoulder, and there's grainy video of Hamas gunmen going around an Israeli city in full daylight with nobody doing anything. And this is a story that repeated itself across southern Israel, mainly in what's known as Otef Aza, the Gaza envelope, the series of communities just off the Gaza border. And what we saw over and over again was gunmen make their way into communities, walk around mostly unimpeded, even storming military bases and crossings, and operating with essential impunity. They stumbled, it wasn't part of their operational plans, but they stumbled across the Nova Music Festival, killing hundreds. In all, they killed over 1,200 people and kidnapped more than 240, many of whom are still in Gaza now, even after a ceasefire and an exchange. But, you know, for all of us in Israel, even those who didn't live in the South, it was a terrifying experience. Obviously, on a much lesser degree than the people who were actually in the South, but everybody knows somebody. Everybody either has a relative or a friend. At the time I was working for the Haaretz newspaper, I just started at the Times of Israel this week as a political correspondent, but at the time I was a reporter for the English edition of Haaretz, and our diplomatic correspondent, who had been my direct boss's assignments editor until a few months earlier, Amir Tibon, lives in Nachal Oz, one of the kibbutzim in Otef Aza on the Gaza border. And I had no idea what was going on with him, with his family. Any of you who've seen 60 Minutes within the last couple of months may have seen the interview with him and his family, and it was really a harrowing story, which was that when the attack started, it was preceded by a rocket barrage. So Amir, like many people living in the South, immediately ran, he and his wife immediately ran to the mamad. The mamad is the reinforced room built into every Israeli house and apartment constructed after the first Gulf War. Legally, every new construction is required to have one. It's essentially a room with a reinforced metal shutter for the window and a heavy-duty door and thick ferroconcrete walls. And it's supposed to offer protection against missile barrages, at least more as much as you can without being in a proper underground shelter. And many people keep their kids in the mamad down on the border as their bedroom, so that the parents will run for shelter, but the kids, if there's an attack in the if they're firing on them, will already be in a protected area. Now, when you're that close to the Gaza border, when the sirens go off, you've got 10 seconds to get to shelter. That's it. So Amir and his wife run into their kids' room, button up, close up everything. And then they realize that it's not just another attack. They've gotten used to those. But this is not normal. And what happens is they end up hearing gunfire and Arabic outside, and Amir contacts his father and says, Dad, I think this is, we're under attack here. Now, Amir's father is Noam Tibon, a retired Israeli general, and Noam Tibon grabs his car keys and a gun, and together with Amir's mother, they drive south. Well, what ends up happening is that Amir's father links up with a squad of soldiers and going door to door in Nachal Oz, killing terrorists and liberating homes until he gets to his son's house, knocks on the door, and Amir's daughter just yells out, "Grandpa's here." So they had a happy ending, but a terrifying experience. They had to stay on the floor in the dark, keeping two children under the age of 3 quiet for 10 hours. Now, if I had to keep my kids quiet for 10 minutes, I don't know if I could do it. So, I think he deserves Parent of the Year award just for that. But that was really, atypical because many people had no one coming. And the army, they weren't deployed in a way that they could easily get there. Many had to redeploy. Hamas had control of some of the roads. It was a death trap. And what we ended up seeing is small numbers of troops in holding actions until the major forces could get there. In one case, there was a squad of female tankers who dealt with dozens of mechablim, of terrorists, on their own, even going so far as to drive their tank over terrorists to crush them, to keep them out of civilian towns. But it was an intense day of fighting, followed by more intense days of fighting as the IDF tried essentially to clear the south from the incursion and roll it back into the Gaza Strip while it prepared for its own counteroffensive. Now, the truth is that Israel was in a bind because after we withdrew from Gaza in 2005, there was a hope that there would be peace. And that hope was dashed when Hamas took over in 2007. And since that point, when Hamas took over and we imposed the blockade on the Gaza Strip, it's been one conflict after another. And even though we had been told when Israel pulled out that if necessary, Israel could go back in for, for security reasons to deal with threats, for the most part, leaving aside, for instance, 2014, there was never really any appetite amongst most Israelis to go into Gaza to try to take out Hamas, because the feeling was, one, they could be sort of tamed and contained on a practical level, but two, we all knew the cost. There was an understanding that there would be a huge human cost to an incursion, both in terms of our own soldiers and in terms of Palestinian civilians, because Hamas operates, as Israelis know, and I think a lot of the world has discovered recently, embedded in a civilian population, using hospitals and storing weapons in mosques. One of my Times of Israel colleagues was with a group of combat engineers when they discovered the entrance to a Hamas tunnel underneath a child's bed in his bedroom in an upscale housing development, along the coast, overlooking the Gaza beach. So when you're fighting an enemy that doesn't take civilian lives seriously and is embedded in an incredibly dense urban area, you know that you can't operate without, one, losing a lot of your own people, and two, bringing about such a high level of civilian deaths that you are really going to quickly lose support internationally. So going into Gaza was always something that was seen as, if we're forced into it, but we're not going to do this. Nobody wanted to do this. And suddenly on October 7th, that calculus changes in the minds of many Israelis, because the idea that Hamas can just come in and such a large ground incursion, invade Israeli territory, uh, there's always going to be fights between left and right, Israel and the international community, about the legitimacy of the settlement enterprise, about the Israeli presence in the West Bank, about East Jerusalem. But Otef Aza isn't that. Otef Aza is internationally recognized Israeli territory. It's not, except in the minds of Hamas, disputed territory. It's not territory that is ever condemned as being settled. It's mainline pre-1967 within the Green Line Israel. And in fact, the communities along the Gaza border are in many ways some of the most liberal and pro-peace communities in the country. So the idea that Hamas can just come in created a consensus among Israelis that, whatever happened before, we have to go in now, and we have to go in hard, and we have to take out Hamas. And that was, coming to a political consensus on anything after a year of some of the most divisive politics we've seen, pitting left against right, ultra-Orthodox versus secular, coming to any type of national consensus on Israel, on anything in Israel, was very shocking, I think. People started putting aside their differences. Groups that were at each other's throats, days before, were suddenly working together to help bring relief to the South. And hundreds of thousands of Israelis were mobilized. Now, I was released from reserve duty last year, and I was in a non-combat role anyway, so I was not called back up. But many friends and relatives were. I don't know where they are at the moment, but as of the last time I checked, two of my cousins are in the Gaza Strip now. And people I know from that area are refugees. Amir is a refugee with his family. I was in the army with a guy whose mother lives in Kibbutz Sa'ad, also on the Gaza border, which did not get hit, luckily, thank God, on October 7th. But, people are just not returning to live there. Israelis from across the South and along the northern border, as things heat up a little bit with Hezbollah. I mean, heat up a lot, but by the standards of what's going on in the South, not a lot. They've been displaced and relocated by the government in our own internal refugee crisis here, which, has really put a strain on the country. 350,000 Israelis have been called up, are not at work. We've shut down the influx of Palestinian workers from the West Bank. There are reasonable suspicions that Palestinian workers who came in from Gaza went into the towns along the border and helped bring out intelligence and map them, because the terrorists, when they went in, knew which house belonged to who, where the local head of the local readiness squad lived. They had a lot of on-the-ground intelligence. So the government, it's been, it hasn't been something that's been a pure consensus, but the government's basically said, for security reasons, we're not letting in Palestinian workers from the West Bank. And many, many foreign workers working in agriculture fled the country. Israeli industry, agriculture is very dependent on foreign workers from Thailand, many of whom were killed or taken hostage during the attack. So suddenly we're finding ourselves with a labor shortfall, and farmers across the country are getting hit very bad, which doesn't bode well for either the economy or food security, which is both an economic and a national security issue. I was down south a few weeks ago, walking through hothouses filled with rotting tomatoes because the electricity went out and people were evacuated for 10 days from some of the communities in the South that still have people living in them that haven't been fully evacuated, but they were evacuated long enough that when they came back, their crops were gone. So, we're really in a bad situation. Now, Israel's stated mission at this point is really get the hostages, take out the leadership of Hamas, and dismantle its capability to carry out attacks, essentially to purge Hamas, to the Gaza Strip of Hamas, to de-Hamasify the Gaza Strip. Now, that's easier said than done, but there is suddenly a consensus. Now, again, the problem is, how do you do that? They're deeply entrenched in Gaza. The entire life of the Gaza Strip is bound up in the rule of Hamas. They're not cuddly, friendly people. They don't allow for, a liberal, pluralistic civil society. So they've got their tentacles in deep. And now what we've seen is the displacement of about 1.5 million Palestinians to areas that the IDF has declared as safe zones in the south. We've seen, due to the fighting, massive destruction of the urban fabric of the Gaza Strip and the beginning of real health and humanitarian crises in Gaza. So far, Israel has managed to retain American support. Israelis are very thankful across the spectrum to the Biden administration. People, even some of the most hardcore people on the right that I've spoken to are very, they have criticisms, but they are thankful for the way the U.S. has been handling it in large measure. But there's sort of that open question: how long can we keep this up? How much time do we have, and what happens on the day after? And that's a critical question, because you can't just, this isn't where you just grab a certain amount of territory and raise the flag and say, okay, we won. There's no defined winning, because even if you win, however you define that, let's say we sweep all the way down to the border between Gaza and Egypt, and we kill every armed Hamas terrorist that we find. How many people affiliated with the group did we not? How many caches of weapons did we not find? You can't root out a group like that without an extended counterinsurgency. And the question is, what can be done and what will the world accept? There have been many suggestions from learned people that we should have some sort of allied multinational Arab force from the UAE and other, Israeli allies in the Arab world. That's been roundly rejected by Israel's Arab partners. The UAE has said that they're not even interested in giving money for the rebuilding of Gaza without some sort of political horizon for the two-state solution, something that for many Israelis is just not on the table right now. The idea, even on the left, that we would enter into negotiations after this is seen as sort of a no-go. And unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority right now is so weak and has so little legitimacy on the Palestinian street that any Palestinian government right now would be in danger of being overtaken by the same type of extremism that we saw take over in the Gaza Strip. When we pulled out, we left the Palestinian Authority in charge. And after Hamas won an election and there was a political crisis, Hamas took over the Gaza Strip by force. And in fact, a majority of Palestinians post October 7th have said that they support Hamas's actions. A lot of people in the West Bank support that. So that's really not on the table at the moment, in Israel. Whether it's the right move or the wrong move, as a journalist, I don't say what I think should be done. I don't say what policies should be. It's not my place. So I'm not going to say what we should do, but I will say what we're likely to do, and I don't think that's likely. By the same token, Israel has said it will not allow the Palestinian Authority back into governing Gaza. And the Palestinian Authority has said they have no interest in going back into Gaza. They're not going to go in there after Israel flattens the Gaza Strip and say, "Hi, we're here as the beneficiaries of the Israelis." That would destroy the remaining credibility of the Palestinian Authority among Palestinians. And there are those on the Israeli hard right who want to rebuild the Gush Katif settlement block, rebuild settlements in Gaza. There's a very firm majority of Israelis who are against that as well. But it does look like there's going to need to be some sort of Israeli security presence. Now, that essentially means a long-term occupation. But what the contours of that are and what that means are very much unclear and very much up in the air. And there's a feeling among many people here that you don't really have a defined plan for that. This is not a contingency anyone was really looking at seriously on a political, diplomatic, or military level. So we're sort of pushing into unknown territory in a way that's very scary and worrying. How do we rebuild? How do we, keep Hamas, not Hamas, how do we keep Gaza from turning into more of a humanitarian disaster? Already there are reports of a real health crisis in Gaza, and there are reports of Israeli soldiers coming back into Israel with, antibiotic-resistant infections. There's a risk of a health crisis on both sides of the contact line, and so, I'm not here to suggest any solutions because I'm not sure. And even if I had an opinion, a firm opinion one way or the other, it's not my place. But the one crack we have seen is the public debate in Israel over having another ceasefire. Israelis are opposed to any sort of long-term ceasefire right now, short of taking out Hamas. But there's a very spirited debate about the possibility of another temporary ceasefire for the purposes of exchanging hostages. The mastermind of October 7th, Yahya Sinwar, was released after decades in Israeli prison during the Gilad Shalit trade about just over a decade ago, when we exchanged, just a massive number of Palestinian security prisoners for one IDF serviceman. And so there's a certain reluctance to do that during times of war. On the other hand, there's massive public pressure to bring our people home. Women, children, men who have been living through horrific conditions for 75 days. So again, it's complicated on a logistical level, on a practical level, on a moral level. There's no easy answers. There's no good answers. There's no solution here where we can say this will save Palestinian lives and Israeli lives and be the moral and practical thing to do with no cost. We're basically stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea, and we're all grappling with horrific moral dilemmas and massive human suffering. But as I said, there's this sort of consensus here. We have to do this. We have to see it through. This has become an existential issue. What some very smart people here, usually, I like to say that journalists are very good at saying what happened. We're damn good at saying what is happening, and we're absolutely horrific at saying what will happen. It's not our job. But some analysts in the press who I respect very much have said, and I tend to agree, that the one thing we can prognosticate in this situation is that if Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't step down following the end of the conflict, however you define it, that the protests we're going to see in Israel are going to dwarf anything we saw over the past year of anti-overhaul protests related to the judicial reforms. So, before I open it up for questions, I'll, just want to talk a little bit about what happened today, just because it's sort of would give you a firsthand look at some of what's happened. Today I was down south. There was a mission of evangelical leaders who were coming in, led by Mike Huckabee. They were brought in by former Israeli ambassador and current Likud MK Danny Danon to tour the South and to see the damage. And I was sent along to report on their trip from the Times of Israel. And I was down in Kfar Aza, one of the kibbutzim on the Gaza border. And the thing is, I've been down to the border a couple times since it started. After I started to recover from my health issues, I started going down, but I hadn't been in the communities that were affected yet. I've spent time, on the Gaza border previously, spending Shabbatot in Kibbutz Saad. It's like heaven on earth. It's one of the most beautiful places you'll ever see. And when I went into Kfar Aza today, it was like seeing heaven turned into hell. Houses were burnt, things were blackened, shell holes in the streets. You would go into houses and see dimples in the floor from grenades that exploded, with holes across the walls and ceilings from shrapnel, where you would know, people were in here and Hamas terrorists tossed grenades in. You would see houses burnt, just covered in ash and soot, because Hamas gunmen burned it down to keep people from escaping, or to drive them out so they could be shot. The wholesale destruction, even 75 days later, was so horrific as to boggle the mind. And people there were holding back tears. And, I was standing there interviewing people. In the distance, you could hear machine guns. And every few minutes, we would hear from very close, we would hear outgoing artillery. So every few minutes, it was, outgoing, not incoming. So it wasn't scary, but it was, surprising, because you never knew when it would happen. So I'd be standing there taking notes, and suddenly I hear boom, and it's like, just outgoing. So it's, it sort of brought home how bad it really is. I guess let's open this up to questions now. I'm sure all of you have a lot you want to ask about this. Okay, someone.
Before you answer that question, I see some coming in. A reminder to folks who aren't familiar with this format here: down at the bottom of your screen on a computer or on your phone, there's a Q&A button, and you're welcome to put in questions there, and then we'll be able to field them this way. Thanks, Sam.
Okay, so when powers around the world call for a ceasefire, why is no one demanding that Hamas free the hostages? They're instead asking Israel to stop their campaign. Would Israel honor a ceasefire if the hostages were all released? So, by all indications, Israel is not willing to trade a long-term ceasefire that doesn't involve the dismantling of Hamas in Gaza. Israel just won't stop short of victory in this case, meaning there are two war aims: freeing the hostages and ending Hamas's rule. But I don't think Israel is going to stop short of full military victory in this case. As for why no one demands to free the hostages, there have been demands. Whether or not it's been enough, whether more should be done, many in Israel have been upset, especially at international women's groups who Israelis feel haven't said enough about the mass rape used against Israeli women, and that's definitely been an issue. Someone else asked, is there no mechanism to remove Netanyahu from office after the conflict if he doesn't step down voluntarily? That would require the defection of several members of the coalition to vote with the opposition to have a vote of no confidence or to call for new elections. So, you know, I think that it's possible that would happen, but I'm not really going to predict because it's impossible to know. It's just what we can't say. And someone just asked a related question: if Netanyahu would step down with the effort to find a replacement for allies Israel, I really do think that we're going to see, if Netanyahu doesn't step down, protests that will paralyze the country. I think we are on the verge of a massive political crisis. Someone else asked, do you think the occupied territories in the West Bank have been settled illegally? That is one of the major questions in both in Israel and abroad. Again, I have no public opinions on political issues. What I will say is that as a journalist, I've learned two things. One is that many people, including people who know quite a bit and are big experts, disagree vociferously. And the second is that the more I learn when I cover things, the more I discover that I can be very wrong as well. So I'm not sure that my personal opinion on that one way or the other would really help. Is there a likely individual or a coalition who would assume the leadership? That's a very good question. Thank you. So right now, a lot of support seems to be going from the hard right and the hard left. Not that there's much of a, viable hard left in Israel at the moment, but much of the support seems to be going towards center parties, center right, center left, to the political center. I think the big political winners here are going to be people like Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz, the centrists, the people who say we support a two-state solution in principle, but practically speaking, at the moment, we don't. People who don't use the same populist approach that we've seen the Likud take under Netanyahu. They're going to be the big winners, it looks like. But again, the one thing about Israeli politics, and we've seen this over the last few years, is that you never know what's going to happen. Is there a likely coalition or individual who would assume the leadership? I think is that the one I just asked? I just answered. I think so. Yeah, basically, I think we would see more of a centrist coalition. Prior to the current Netanyahu government, we had a coalition that included a very diverse group of parties, including hard left, hard right, settlers, and Islamists, and secularists, and religious Zionists all rolled up together. And when you have a government like that, you don't always expect to solve the big issues of the day, the long-running argument over who is a Jew, or the issues of the standing of different groups in Israeli society. But you do get government. You do get a government that functions and engages in the business of governing. I think that's what Israelis want right now, is a return to some sort of stability. But there's also, I think, a need right now to really reassess, our basic assumptions as Israelis. Is our system running the way we want? What can we do better? So we'll have to see. But I think we're getting to see a political realignment. this is a really good question. Is it possible to know a proportion of Palestinians agree with Hamas's stated mission to kill Jews? So unfortunately, a very large number of Palestinians have voiced support. I'm just pulling up some poll data now. 1 second. So Palestinian polling carried out by Palestinians have found that about 3/4 of Palestinians supported Hamas's attack on October 7th. Now, keep in mind, by the way, that there on the Palestinian street in East Jerusalem, for instance, we've seen a lot of conspiracy theories about what happened. There's a lot of denial of what happened. If you watch Arabic language media in the Arab world, you're not going to see a lot about what actually happened on October 7th. So, on the one hand, I think a lot of people in the Arab world don't understand the extent of what happened and what Hamas did and the extent of their crimes. On the other hand, you do see massive Palestinian support for the Hamas attack. There's a group, AWRAD, the Arab World Research and Development Group, did a poll that showed nearly 60% of Palestinian respondents very much supported the military operation, quote unquote, on October 7th. And further polling found similar results. So that's very discouraging. If there is going to be any hope at any point for a negotiated settlement to the conflict, we're going to have to be able to move the needle on that public opinion. And we've actually seen, it's a bit of a trend. What happens every time there's fighting in Gaza, two things happen. One is support for Hamas goes up, and two, support for Hamas goes up way higher in the West Bank than in Gaza. It goes up in Gaza too, but it goes up much higher in the West Bank because the people in the West Bank don't have to live with the consequences of Hamas's actions while the people in Gaza do. So that's why you see higher support in the West Bank for what Hamas does than in Gaza itself. Someone said, thank you for talking about the reluctance to go into Gaza previously. What are the feelings in Israel towards the civilian humanitarian crisis in Gaza? Also a very good question. Thank you. So there is a feeling among many people I've spoken to that it's a damn shame. It's horrible. And we don't have a choice. That's the feeling of many people. Now, there's a legit debate going on about what to do. The civilians in Gaza need aid. On the other hand, Hamas frequently takes what goes in and uses it for its own people. I'm not going to say what we should do on any policy issue whatsoever. Again, it's never my place to say what we should do or what the right answers are. But Israelis are not indifferent to what is happening in the Gaza Strip. Someone asked, by killing Palestinian civilians, is Israel fanning the flames of jihadist sentiment? I think the horse is already out of the barn on that one. I guess the question is, what choice does Israel have? That's the basic consensus. If Israel allows this to happen, it'll just happen. Hamas has said they want to do it again and again and again. If Israel didn't respond, that would embolden them. Again, no easy answers here. This, unfortunately, is not a simple or easy situation. Someone again asked if it's illegal to settle in the occupied territories. I am not weighing into that. Many more learned people than me on both sides of the issue have put out statements. I just report in the most neutral language I can what people do and what the opinions on both sides are. when you look at the major Arab nations, can you point out their goals, concerns, and approaches regarding the future of Gaza? So, two countries, and I'd like to really highlight here. One is Egypt, which has been critical in this conflict. The Egyptians have been using this to bolster their own standing as a regional mediator and have been important in terms of talks. They share a border with Gaza. They're also part of the blockade, and they've been fighting their own jihadist insurgency in the Sinai for years. A very big Egyptian goal is to make sure they don't get an influx of Palestinians into Egyptian territory, which they do not want. Some Israeli ministers have floated the idea of Gazans going to Egypt, and the Egyptians are dead set against it. I would also like to highlight Qatar. Qatar has been critical in the negotiations, the efforts to free hostages. They have also been a major funder of Hamas and host Hamas leaders living in Qatar itself. And recently there was a clip from a speech by the head of the Mossad, which was published by Khan, Israel's public broadcaster, in which he said he had been ordered, just like sort of like the post-Munich massacre, approach of Israel of hunting down the terrorists one by one over the years. He said that he's been ordered to hunt down the leaders of Hamas wherever they are in the world, if it's Qatar or Turkey or anywhere. So Qatar is really, Israel's going to take a good hard look at what to do about Qatar afterwards in terms of our approach. I'm obviously not talking about a military approach, but how they handle the issue of relation. Well, you don't have relations with Qatar, but officially, but how to deal with this issue. But that's not really something on the front burner at the moment. So someone asked about people not believing Hamas fighters' video slaughter. No, people in the Arab world have not been believing this. When I was at Haaretz, one of my Arabic-speaking colleagues, did a really, really good piece looking with an overview of the media coverage in the Arab world, and it was problematic. If the Arab media doesn't report accurately what happened, that sways public opinion. On the other hand, Israel's recent rapprochement with several of its now Arab partners has opened the way for many in the Arab world who would have previously been very, very reluctant to say anything supportive of Israel to sort of shed that fear and to be supportive of Israel publicly. Now, that's not universal. I did a piece recently. I interviewed the head of the Srebrenica Genocide Memorial in Bosnia, a very brave man who, for those of you who don't know, during the Balkan Wars in the 90s, Serbian troops, ethnic Serbs, murdered 8,000 Muslim men and boys in Srebrenica in what was later determined by international tribunals to be a genocide. And the genocide memorial in Bosnia is essentially their version of Yad Vashem. And the head of the only genocide memorial in the Muslim world, as far as I'm aware, was the subject of death threats for refusing to condemn Israel and support Hamas. He was called a tool of the Jews and a puppet of the World Jewish Congress because he's friends with senior people at the WJC and they've worked together. So again, no simple answers. I wish I could come in and say, this is what's going on, A, B, C, D, Zehu, that's it. But at the end of the day, this is just such a, well, the word I want to use is not something I should use to play company, but it's really a mess. Some good question here. Are there imams or Muslim leaders and or Israeli Arabs vocally condemning Hamas' genocidal attacks? Absolutely yes. There have been leaders of the local Arab community. Look, the local Arab community was affected just as much as the Jewish one on October 7th. Hamas did not discriminate between Arabs and Jews in who it killed. There were Arab citizens who stood by and did nothing, and there were Arab citizens who risked their lives over and over and over to save Jewish lives. It's a mixed bag, the same as any community anywhere. But they were hit hard, and Muslim and Arab Israelis were murdered too, and they suffered. And in fact, the head of one Arab party, Mansour Abbas, has publicly stated, not only in Hebrew, but in Arabic, in local Arab language media. And again, Abbas is a moderate Islamist. He was part of the last non-Netanyahu government. He stated publicly and emphatically that targeting civilians is against Islamic values. On the other hand, you do have members of the Arab community who deny the atrocities, who have sought to protest against what Israel's doing. You can't really tar any group with a broad brush. There's always a lot of nuance, but I think a lot of Israelis really appreciated what Mansour Abbas said, and really feel for our Arab fellow citizens who were also murdered. So
Sam,
in the U.S.,
can I
Yes,
ask
of course.
a couple questions?
Of course.
So one of the things that I'm wrestling with, and I am really wrestling with this conflict and the cost in civilian lives on the Palestinian side, because the challenge, as I look at it, is the moral cost is enormously high. And is there going to be a benefit great enough to justify that cost? And some of that is because I'm deeply skeptical when people keep saying we have to defeat Hamas, we have to defeat Hamas. What I see is a campaign that is creating the next generation of Hamas, and maybe under a different name. But all these civilians die, their homes are destroyed. These are not folks who are going to feel good about Israel unless what is on the table is the possibility of a two-state solution and a peace in the aftermath of war. And at the very least, if there's not, you said, there's not a stomach for it, but at the very least, a stomach to stop creating more and more obstacles to a two-state solution, to put a serious leash on the settlers in the West Bank who are wreaking havoc under the cover of war. Again, what is a long-term plan? How is it possible to defeat Hamas purely militarily without just creating another generation of Hamas? Maybe I'll start with that one.
Well, what I can say is that when you have a situation where Hamas is in power and they've had the time to indoctrinate an entire new generation, if you don't respond, then that creates an encouragement for more attacks later. They're already radicalized. As much radicalization is going to happen has happened already. And at this point, I think many people are just looking for, I guess, the 21st century equivalent of denazification. Is it easy? Is it simple? Is it something that could be done in any sort of near or midterm framework? No. I think part of the problem on all sides of the political debate within Israel about what to do with the Palestinians has sort of been this assumption that there's one policy, whether that's annexation or settlement or two-state solutions or unilateral disengagement, that there's one solution that's a magic bullet. No matter what we do, there's going to be a series of trade-offs, and there might not even be a solution. Maybe it's something from one ad hoc thing to another. I don't know. I do know that we have to do something. What that something is might change over time. And again, there's, we're Americans. I'm an Israeli too, but I grew up in the States, and I was born in the States. And as Americans, we like to have clear-cut solutions. We like to know, that there's a clear winner, that there's a solution, there's something we can do. And I just think that this situation is so complex that there's no real good answer saying we're going to do A, B, and C, and this will solve it. We have entrenched differences that go back a very long time. We have an increasingly radicalized Palestinian population, an increasingly weak Palestinian Authority, and Israelis who have, after multiple rounds of peacemaking, have dealt with intifada and terror. It's going to take a very long time before both sides can go back to the table if it happens. And I just don't know that there's much room for, a political horizon at the moment. I think the only way to reach that political horizon is to stabilize things on the security level enough that people feel secure enough to take those chances again. But again, what we should do, what the answer is, what the root cause is, we can debate that till the cows come home, and people have been for a century, debating what to do about these things. So at the end of the day, I think at this point, the only thing we can say, again, is no real good options. Just we try to pick the least bad one. I know that's not what people want to hear. That's not what we want to hear here. We want to go, oh, this is what we can do that'll allow both sides to live in peace and dignity, and we'll stop fighting, and we'll, turn our swords into plowshares. I know all the Israeli farmers who've been affected would love to do that. All the people displaced from the south, all the Palestinians who are, displaced from their homes right now would like it to stop. But the question is, how do we make it stop? And I think that's beyond my ability as a journalist to say. I can tell you what is happening. I can't tell you what should happen. The only political solution I can think of is maybe we should tell all the Israelis and Palestinians, okay, all of you get out and go to Miami Beach for a few weeks and calm down, and then we'll resume. Maybe a few weeks at like the Fontainebleau would help.
Sam, I have a question. What do you say to the burgeoning younger American Jewish population that appears to not have a connection to Israel? I heard, it was quoted in our local paper, someone saying, and I'm sure you've heard, not in my name, I'm a Jew, but Israel isn't what makes me Jewish, they're separate. Are you aware of the extent of that in the States? Are Israelis? It's disheartening, I am sure, but you have thoughts on that? What would we say?
Can I just add, and I would add, what I hear sometimes is even more intense than that. And it's a devastating thing, because the Zionist goal from the start is that Israel makes us all more safe. What I hear from a lot of younger Jews is Israel is making me less safe. It's making me less safe in the United States. so it's a kind of I hear from folks, this is not where I am, but but it's where people I know and love are, and it's a kind of complete turning on its head of what Israel was for me growing up.
So, I think that obviously we always see a spike in anti-Semitism when there's fighting in the Middle East. I do think, though, that the presence of a robust Jewish state that is important diplomatically for other countries and economically has significantly shifted the landscape, meaning that the type of rhetoric you see from governments, in the post-Holocaust period, that kind of rhetoric against anti-Semitism, those efforts against anti-Semitism, who knows how long those would have lasted post-Holocaust, even with the Holocaust, if it weren't for the interest in Israel, meaning like the diplomatic and political interests of maintaining relations with the state. The truth is that I think Israel, in that sense, has done a lot. But again, the conflict in Israel does spark anti-Semitism as well. It's hard to separate those out, but the truth is we've always been subject to anti-Semitism and to attacks. And if it wasn't about Israel, it'd be about something else. Israel does provide that sort of like diplomatic and political cover for for Jews around the world, and it's given Jews here the ability, when attacked, to fight back. So, as someone living in Israel, as an Israeli citizen, I feel that is a net gain. But I definitely understand that people are scared and worried, and not everyone in the Jewish world is going to agree with what Israel does. Not everyone in Israel agrees with what Israel does. The truth is that if you show me a group of Jews who all agree on one thing, well, it would be the first time that I've seen one. But I definitely understand that there is that sentiment. We've known that there are groups of younger American Jews who are growing increasingly distant or disaffected from Israel for years. Know that for decades. It was reinforced in 2013 or 2014 when the Pew study on American Jewry came out. Subsequent polling has shown similar things. It's not a new issue by any stretch of the imagination. And Israelis are, I think, very aware right now of anti-Semitism abroad, and as to the extent of how much they're aware of the sentiments of certain segments of the American Jewish population, I couldn't 100% tell you, because as someone who deals so much with diaspora and is an American Jew and an Israeli Jew, it's I tend to follow issues in a slightly different way than my Israeli colleagues. So I'm not sure, how much they know that I don't. But again, not the most equivocal answer, but there it is.
One kind of very cynical question. You mentioned that there will be overwhelming protests if Bibi doesn't step down when the war ends. Is he not perversely incentivized to prolong the war?
I don't believe so. Look, I'm not going to get into Bibi Netanyahu's head, but Netanyahu famously is actually pretty risk averse. His rhetoric and his actions, his rhetoric is always more belligerent than his actions, which have been pretty conservative in terms of risk. And I don't think that Netanyahu is going to do anything along those lines. And cynicism is, necessary. I see it a lot in myself and in colleagues who cover things, but I don't think so. But you would really have to get into Netanyahu's head for that. But I don't think so.
There are a couple more questions there, Sam.
So one is really sort of an existential question here about Yeshayahu Leibovitz and the situation in the West Bank. That's, I'm going to say, a little past outside of my purview. And let's see. Someone asked about providing links to stories about Arab condemnations of sacrifices. Look in Times of Israel, look in Haaretz, look in Israeli media. It's all there. I don't have any open tabs in front of me at the moment. And this is the last one I'm going to answer because it's now almost 5:20 in the morning, and if I don't get a couple hours of sleep, I am going to be non-functional today. But if not the Arab countries, is there any potential for UN oversight of Gaza after the conflict? No, I don't think so. I don't think that that's in the cards. Israelis have experience with UNIFIL in South Lebanon, which has not been particularly effective in reducing friction. And so far, we haven't seen any real serious efforts at creating a multinational force of the UN. I don't think that America would necessarily support that, which would put the kibosh on the whole thing, and Israel certainly isn't going to agree. I want to leave you with something a little more optimistic, which is to say, we're Jews. We've had thousands of years of bad things happening, and we get through it. And the one good thing that has come out of this war is that right and left, religious and secular, from people from Tel Aviv to people from settlements, people are coming together and caring for each other here in a very heartening way. And that Israelis and Jews, I think, are going to get through it together. Whatever happens, we will come through on the other side. And I want to say thank you so much for having me. And hopefully in the future, I will have something more positive to report.
Dan?
Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you leaving us on a positive note. And we're wishing you Shabbat Shalom. And to all, thank you to everybody for being here. Thank you to Shelley for running our tech, and for folks in Boise, I just want to say, this is what we hope will be the beginning of an opportunity for our community to continue to learn together, to converse together, to share together. I very much appreciate the notion of, we will go through this, and thank you very much. And again, be well.
Thank you, Sam.
Shabbat
Toda
shalom.
rabah.
B'ksa.
Shabbat shalom.